Well, good morning. We are glad to welcome you to the first of our chapel services for the fall semester. We're glad that you are here. We start with a very interesting and I hope informative opportunity for all of us as we enter into an interfaith conversation. We are representing today the three Abrahamic faiths, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and we are so happy to have the guests behind me who I'll introduce to you later who have volunteered their time not only to be a part of this but also in preparation that has preceded this so that we can make the most of our time together. The chapel service today really is the convergence of three ongoing and major emphases in Mercer life this year. First of all, this is kind of the launch for the Lyceum program. Lyceum is a new initiative that we have begun that brings together various lectures, service projects, special presentations, conferences around what we believe will be essential and vital themes that are current in present-day culture. The Lyceum theme for the next 2 years is rebuilding democracy, and I think as you consider interfaith dialogue and rebuilding democracy, that connection is certainly not contrived. Democracy depends on communities coming together with mutual support and understanding and hospitality, and so this will initiate that effort, we think, in a very important and profound way. Additionally to that, the White House invited Mercer University, along with a number of other colleges and universities across America, to participate in an interfaith initiative. And that interfaith initiative is designed to bring campus communities together of various faiths in understanding, in cooperative service projects. And so this interfaith conversation, of course, feeds into that interfaith initiative quite well. You have received, or should have received, a response card, a short survey card. That's very important because the White House wants to be able to monitor the effectiveness of what we're doing. And so we will be asking you, if you will, towards the end, we're going to go through a time of conversation and then we'll move to question and answer. During that question and answer time, if you'll take just a moment to fill those out, then we're going to have students who are Mercer service scholars at the exits, and you'll hand those cards back to them when we are finished. And so if you'll do that, we would appreciate it. And the final convergence is, of course, chapel. This is a time when we bring our community together. How tragic it is that the faiths of the world in common espouse humanity, hospitality, cooperation, and love, and yet so often there is hostility between us, undercutting the very heart of what's at the center of each of those religious traditions. And so what we're trying to do in this chapel series is to bring together those diverse voices on our campus and help us to be able to gather on some common ground that all of us share and to improve the understanding and again the respect that we have and even appreciation for each other's traditions. I think Mercer as a Baptist school finds that to be a very consistent part of our heritage. Baptists above all believe that there ought to be freedom of religion and freedom of conscience. And so my role as university minister is to make sure that this place is a place of free and faithful engagement of all of our religious traditions, that this is a hospitable place for all of us. And so we look forward to that opportunity together. And because this is chapel, I'm going to ask if you would to bow with me just for a moment of prayer, and then I'll introduce our guests. Grant us, O God, that we might have wisdom to know deeply your will and purpose. Grant us, O God, that we might have humility, that we might serve you in loving one another. And grant us, O God, faithfulness, that we might live each one in response to your voice that calls us. For this we pray in your name. Amen. We're very delighted to have quite a distinguished panel of guests with us today, and I'm going to introduce them alphabetically. First of all, we're pleased to have Dr. Eimad Houry. Dr. Houry is chair of the Political Science Department has been so nearly since day one of his stepping on campus many years ago. Born in Kuwait, raised in Lebanon, he brings both an informed perspective and a passion to the discussion of the dynamics of the political, religious, cultural, social fabric of the Middle East. He emphasizes that not only in the classroom, but also gives expression to that through his leadership in the Mercer International Affairs organization. His BA was from Florida A&M, a master's and a PhD from Florida State University. Along with his considerable influence academically, Dr. Houry is a very gracious and informed voice of the Islamic tradition on our campus. And so, Dr. Houry, we welcome you. Thank you for being here. We're also pleased to have Dr. Scott Nash with us. Dr. Nash began his career at Mercer in 1996, teaching in the Christianity department. He is now serving as the Columbus Roberts Professor of Christianity. Along with teaching Old and New Testament courses, he also teaches a course in world religions, and so that brings a great perspective to this conversation today. He is an ordained Baptist minister and has served churches in a variety of capacities, both full-time and part-time. And so, Dr. Nash, we welcome you. Finally, we are pleased that Dr. Larry Schlesinger is able to join us for these conversations. Dr. Schlesinger, born in Washington, D.C., has degrees from George Washington University and also a master's in arts from the Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion, in New York City, and also his Doctorate of Divinity from that degree. He is an ordained rabbi and serves as the spiritual leader of Temple Beth Israel here in Macon. And in his spare time, serves on the city council. And so, which I would imagine drains all of the spiritual vitality that he can possibly muster. So if you would, please welcome these who are our guests today. And again, my welcome too. Thank you for being here. We laughed at the outset about one of the problems of doing interfaith dialogue is that each of the three of you sit here as a representative of a tradition that is very broad and very diverse, and no single person could possibly represent the diversity of any of these traditions. And so given that caveat at the beginning that you are not speaking for a tradition, but speaking from a tradition, Dr. Houry, let's start with you. If you would, give us some idea of the diversity within the Islamic tradition, and if you can, then position yourself within that spectrum of diversity.
Good morning, everyone. The Islamic tradition is extremely diverse on every level or dimension you can think of. There is an organization, it's called the Organization of Islamic Conference. It has 56 nations that are members. These nations are predominantly Muslim. They span every corner of the globe, Asia, Africa, Middle East, Europe, and South America. Muslims live in large numbers in many other states, including Russia and China, of course, where there's large concentrations of populations. Estimates of the number of people who follow the Islamic tradition vary, but anywhere from 1.2 billion to about 1.6 billion across the globe. So, me speaking on behalf of Muslims this morning is a travesty almost. But I am a Muslim, and I am not here as a scholar of Islam. I do not study religion as a livelihood, but I do follow the religion, and I do try to understand what I'm supposed to do as a practitioner of the faith. I do not consider myself to be a strict practitioner of the faith. I'm a soft Muslim, as you could it's very difficult to be a traditionalist in a place like the United States, and because of work, because of other obligations or commitments. But nonetheless, there is a great deal of variety in terms of interpreting and teaching Islam. You've heard about some of the more radical interpretations that make the news on a regular basis, but there are also some very important liberal voices that do not get heard or noticed as often as they should. These are voices of modernization. These are progressive voices that are trying to make Islam and modernity essentially work together. Islam is a very flexible faith. It is a faith that is designed to help you live your life on a daily basis. And there's really no reason to believe that you can be a very good Muslim, but at the same time, you can be a very good citizen wherever you live.
Good, thank you.
Shalom. Salam alaikum. It is daunting to be here as the representative of a large tradition. Exact numbers are unreliable, but the source I use says that there are probably 2.3 to 2.4 billion people in the world who identify themselves as Christian. That's about a third of the world's population, I guess, maybe close to 40%. And more than half of those come from a tradition that I know very little about because it has not been my tradition or my experience, and that's Roman Catholic. But the majority of people who identify themselves as Christian in the world would belong to that tradition. And then another large portion of the Christian population in the world would be the Orthodox churches that we in the West probably know the least about. The tradition that I'm a part of is that hodgepodge of everything else that sometimes loosely goes under the name of Protestant. And within that tradition, I'm a part of one of the larger groups within that tradition, Baptists. But there are so many kinds of Baptists in the world that it's hard to say that's what Baptists are. I am an ordained Baptist minister, raised in a church that belonged to the Southern Baptist Convention. I no longer am a part of that Baptist body because of theological controversies that happened in the last several decades. I would position myself on the moderate side of Baptist life. But also very Baptist in my perspective on a lot of things, living out the old adage that wherever you have two Baptists, you have at least three opinions. So I would say that in many of the topics that we're going to talk about, I don't represent the Christian world. I don't represent the Baptist answer, and sometimes I don't even represent myself very well in trying to express what I believe.
Yeah.
The Jewish world is a lot smaller world than the Muslim or Christians. I'm not sure of exact numbers, but I think we're talking today about some 12 million, 15 million, something like that. The Nazis did a pretty good job of eradicating about a third of the Jewish population during the Second World War. So there are two great centers now. Europe used to be the major center. Two great centers now are one, the United States, and two, the state of Israel. And because human nature is human nature, you're going to find that Jews really sort of span the spectrum of belief, which goes from being ultra-Orthodox, which means that you basically follow a Jewish law according to a book called the Shulchan Aruch. Orthodox Jews, to a certain extent, do this too, which basically was Jewish practice and custom at the end of the Middle Ages to Jews who are very, very liberal. Some are humanistic. Others will say they're atheists. The Holocaust did a lot to really sort of stun the Jewish world. Ask questions, where was God? Maybe we'll get into this a little bit later. So we span the spectrum. There are three major movements here in the United States. One is Orthodox, which I liken to Catholicism, in that there's certain faith beliefs that you have to believe in. There's certain practices which you are obligated to perform. On the other side of the spectrum, there is the Reformed Jewish community, which would be like mainstream Protestant congregations, where there's liberalism. You're allowed to sort of, play around with the tradition, pick and choose that which is, still meaningful. And then in the middle, there are the conservative Jews, who I liken to Episcopalians, in that the things they do you would associate with Catholicism. The things of conservative Jews you might associate with Orthodox Judaism. But just as Episcopalians are not Catholics, neither are conservative Jews Orthodox. Personally, I am on the Reform side of the spectrum, which is the mainstream Protestant denomination here, and represent a more liberal, accommodating viewpoint. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's get started then. Part of what we're trying to do is to identify some similarities, some differences. My questions are going to try to avoid religious jargon so that we don't get put into boxes. And so I'll frame the questions maybe a little differently than we would expect to hear them. But the first one is a kind of simple one. And Eimad, well, again, we'll start with you. If you would, choose just one word that would describe or express your understanding of who God is. And then elaborate on that just a little bit, why you chose that word.
I think it's fairly simple for a Muslim to identify that one word that would characterize what God or who God is, and that is the word unique. Muslims believe that God is a being that is unparalleled or not comparable to any other being. He is not human-like. He does not have the qualities or attributes of a human being. God is above everyone and everything. God is the creator. God is the Almighty. God is responsible for all creation and for all events and occurrences that occur in that creation. God does not have human qualities, and in fact, Muslims are instructed in the Holy Quran not to even try to fathom what God is, because we are incapable of actually imagining the nature of God. Just kind of as a point of clarification. In Genesis, for example, with the story of creation, it says God created the earth in 6 days and then rested on the seventh. Well, to a Muslim, that would be unacceptable, because fatigue is a human quality. It is not a divine quality, and therefore God would not get tired from creating creation, essentially. Another example that I can use in order to compare the scriptures, in the Quran, there is a story about Jesus and Mary, and God uses the fact that both Jesus and Mary had to eat and drink as evidence that they are not divine, because he does not have to eat or drink. So when I say God is unique or unparalleled or not comparable to any other being, it's because we can't really assign to God the kinds of qualities that we assign to ourselves. And God is above and greater than and more perfect than anything else that we can imagine.
Good. Scott?
The one word that I would choose, if one word is to be chosen, is the word compassionate. And I know that that understanding of God would not be alien either to Islam or to Judaism. But I think it is central to Christianity. Within the Christian tradition, many of the things that Professor Houry described about God would also be affirmed. Except there would be the affirmation that God rested on the seventh day. Not out of fatigue, but out of choice. But it seems to me that what is central in Christianity is the conviction that something distinctive and definitive has been revealed by God in Jesus Christ, and that Christians look to Jesus as the window for understanding what is the central nature of God. And that would be the giving of oneself, the giving of life on behalf of the world, that this is at rock bottom who God is. It is, for me, expressing the idea that the supreme power that is at work in this universe cares. That this is not a universe that is simply going its way as a machine, but that there is fundamentally that force in this universe that cares about the living beings and the compassion.
Great. Larry?
This is kind of a hard exercise because Moses Maimonides, who was a medieval Jewish philosopher, certainly the greatest of medieval times, so probably the greatest of all time, said that you can label God, but no matter what you say about what label you use, you're limiting God, because if you say that God is omnipresent, well, that's good, but God is more than omnipresent. You can add label after label after label. You can do 10, 100, 1,000. You're still not going to really capture the full essence of God. So it's almost like don't even try to define God specifically, because you'll never be able to do that. God is greater than all the words that you can possibly use. But I would, if I was to narrow it down to one word, I would say that word is one. Judaism's central belief, Judaism's enduring gift to the world, is the notion that there is one God in heaven and earth. Now, to us, that seems like a, given. But, in Abraham's time, and we trace this recognition biblically back to Abraham, which, maybe, close to 4,000 years ago, that was radical thought, because everybody was polytheists. You go to the times of, King David and King Solomon, that is still a radical thought in that era. Even you go down to Jesus' time, and that still is a radical thought, because Roman culture itself is polytheistic, and it's only after Jesus' time, as the church begins to grow, that this notion of the unity of God becomes the dominant theology for all of our religions. So I believe that these other two words are equally valid. I guess just speaking from the Jewish perspective, we say, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one." It's a central part of every worship service that we do, and that's why I would pick one above any of the others, none of which can adequately describe the nature of God, because God is unique.
I think that's really an important point, and I'm going to take just an editorial moment here to draw a connection between the three things that were said here and relate that to our conversation. Each of the three guests have said in their own way that God is somehow beyond our conceptualizing. God is beyond our grasp, that whatever box we might build to contain our understanding of God, God is always beyond that. God is bigger than our traditions. God is bigger than our understanding. And for me, that becomes the real impetus for doing what we're doing here. If God is beyond my understanding, if God is beyond even the boundaries of my tradition, then it seems to me helpful to listen to each other so that my own understanding of God can be enriched by those who look at God from a different angle, a different perspective. Not to abandon my position, not to abandon the place where I stand, but to better understand the place where I stand and how that relates to others. And I heard each of the three of you in different ways indicate that God is beyond our own individual traditions, and therefore we're each seeking to understand God in the light of the tradition that we stand in, recognizing God is beyond that. So having said that, let me move on to an additional question. Religious traditions make presumptions about how closely God is connected to what happens in the world. Some see God as a distant observer, removed from what's happening. Others see God as intimately present and aggressively active in the events of daily affairs. So, Eimad, again, we'll start with you. From your perspective, how and to what degree is God active or connected to the world, and how is God experienced or present or revealed in the world?
As a summary opening statement, I can easily and confidently say as a Muslim that God is extremely active in human affairs and in the world in general, whether it's human or otherwise. The creation of the human race in Islam is not an accident. It is not an afterthought. It is not the result of Adam sinning in the heavens. God created the human race in order to test the willingness of human beings to follow his prescribed path to eternal life in heaven after death. In order to make that possible, God revealed in great, sometimes very painful detail, how human beings should live their lives in every way possible, whether it is relationships with your spouse, whether it's relationships with your children, whether it's relationships with the rest of the family, whether it's commerce, whether it is relationship with your faith and relationship with God. All of those things are actually laid out in great detail in the Quran for a Muslim that is looking for a virtuous life to follow those prescribed steps. Ultimately, God prescribes what human beings are capable of handling. There are several verses in the Quran that refer to the fact that the burden of worshiping God is not an overdue burden. It is only to the extent that a human being can actually responsibly manage that burden. Ultimately, life is a test. Ultimately, life is about developing that relationship directly with God. Muslims do not have a hierarchy. They do not have priests. They do not have popes. The relationship that a Muslim develops is a direct relationship with God. And ultimately, when you have to answer to God in the day of judgment, you have to answer for your own deeds. There is no intercession. There is nobody else to essentially answer for you or explain your deeds other than yourself. So in all of these respects, essentially, God is very involved because life is a test of resolve on the part of Muslims to live a righteous life. Ultimately, God gave us a template, and our task and responsibility as Muslims is to try to follow those guidelines as closely as possible in order to win God's favor in the afterlife.
Good. Dr. Nash?
This is probably one of those questions about which there is the greatest diversity among Christians. I think there is, at least from perspective of the Bible, the Scripture of Christianity, the sense that God is working directly and intimately with the creation. Creation is the beginning of the story, and there is a consummation of the creation at the end of the story. And that God is working in between the two. Where the difference lies between various Christian interpretations is exactly how is God working. And I think there's a spectrum there of some seeing God pulling all the strings, that everything that happens is, in some sense, the direct activity of God. We may think that we're doing it, but God is doing it. I think to the other extreme would be the idea that sort of the deist view, that God has set all of this in motion, but God has kind of retired to the study to wait till it happens. Most people would be somewhere in the middle, that God is working behind the scenes or sometimes on stage of what's going on in the history of the world. And this is one of the places where Christianity has struggled with modernity and findings of science in terms of how the world works. If you understand the universe operating according to certain forces and principles, where is the place for God in that?
So a broad perspective. Okay, Larry?
Well, this is a really hard question to answer, and I will just say, personally, I don't know. There's a midrash, which is a 2,000-year-old rabbinic parable, which says that when at Mount Sinai, God said, "Okay, I've created the world for you. I have freed you from Egyptian bondage, and I've given you the law." The Torah, the 5 books of Moses, traditionally are said to all have been given by God to Moses at Mount Sinai, just not the 10 Commandments. So I've done all 3 of these things. You know now what to do by following the law. You know what I expect of you. I expect you to be a kingdom of priests. I expect you to be a holy people. And now I am withdrawing from the affairs of humankind. It's up to you. So the notion is Judaism is that you really have to be that holy soul. I mean that's your responsibility to God. And that kind of a theology explains why God may not have been there at times when you might expect God to be there. I mentioned the Holocaust before. That presented such a theological dilemma within Judaism. I don't know it's been resolved, to this day. On the other hand, there's some things that have happened, to me that you might just chalk up to coincidence that I sometimes feel are not coincidental, that there was something, planned in this whole thing, that God does have a, plan for you, and it works in ways that, maybe you can see best in hindsight, rather than at the present time or looking ahead. Prayer is one of the pillars of Judaism. After the temple's destroyed in the year 70 by the Romans, prayer replaces sacrifice in the Jewish tradition. It is the means by which you approach God, you communicate with God. Prayer doesn't hurt, and that's why I say I just don't know. Because on the one hand, I've got this dilemma with where was God when we needed him most, and that midrash which says he's withdrawn. It's really up to us. It's human beings who are really distressing one another. And then on the other hand, I do feel this personal relationship with God, through prayer and the experience of every day. I do believe that if you really want to confirm the existence of God, all you have to do is take a look at the world, the universe in which we live. I mean, there is a complexity out there that defies, human understanding. And we know so much more about the world, the universe that we live in than any other generation, has in the past. And the more we know about it, the more awesome it really is. I mean, when we think of ourselves as being in the Milky Way galaxy, and then there are all these galaxies that are out there as well, and that there may be parallel universes. That is not impossible. I mean, that is just tremendous. And you look at the world on a microscopic level, and you see this complexity, down there, as well. I mean, to me, if you really want to see the work of God, at least, I mean, take a look through a telescope, take a look through a microscope, and it is awesome.
Good. All right. Well, what we want to do is we want to save some time for you all to be able to respond, to ask some questions. I'm going to ask you also, again, because it is important that we get your responses on these surveys. And so we're going to honor your time. We've got about 5 minutes before that 10:45 bell rings, so you'll have plenty of time to get to your next class. But that leaves us some time for questions and also some time to make our responses on the card. So from the audience, what questions would you like to ask our panelists? Yes, please stand so we can hear you. We're able to. Yeah, just say it one more time, a little bit louder. Just the general explanation.
Okay, I'm going to be really brief. Sharia law is a misnomer because it makes it sound as though that there is a standard set of laws that are understood and embraced by all Muslims everywhere for similar issues or questions that they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, both dealing with personal life as well as social issues. That is simply not the case. There is no standard Sharia law. Sharia law is essentially a interpretation of God's revelation in the Holy Quran. And so, depending on where you live, depending on the person who is actually doing the reading and the explaining, the meaning of Sharia law or the content of Sharia law will vary from country to country. And in terms of the practice of Sharia law, there is no standard either. Lots of countries claim that they practice Sharia law in some respects. The most common way to practice Sharia law is when it comes to civil or personal affairs. So any issues governing adoption, for example, or inheritance, or marriage, or any kind of family-related disputes, these are usually sort of settled based on interpretations of verses that are found in the Quran and the way that those verses are being applied under the laws of the particular country. So I'm willing to bet that there are 56 Muslim states around the world, and there are not 56 Sharia varieties, but probably twice as many, if not 3 times as many Sharia varieties out there. Sharia is simply a collection of laws, but what those laws are vary from location to location.
Okay, good. Yeah, question here, then in the back. Yes, please.
This is for Rabbi. Does the Jewish community recognize the Messianic movement in Judaism?
We have a very good relationship with the Messianic community here in Macon. All I can really talk about is our relationship, and frankly the state of Israel and the issues that surround the state of Israel have in some ways brought us together. We diverge from that Messianic movement in terms of their embrace of Yeshua, which is the Hebrew name for Jesus. Jesus just has never been a part of mainstream Jewish tradition. But as I have a good relationship with Greg Hirschberg, who's the rabbi at Beit Yeshua here in Macon, and I know a lot of people from the congregation. So we live in a country that is blessed with religious freedom. frankly, that's everybody's personal choice. And as long as you're not, harming me or, anybody else, then, go in peace, do your thing. I'm fine.
Okay. A question back here. You're going to speak loudly so we can hear you.
If possible, this is for all three. What are the best qualities of the other two religions that would persuade you to join the other religion? Like, what would be the best?
You're gonna have to move forward because it's a long distance out there, and we're old guys. What's that? Oh, okay. Yeah.
I was just wondering what the best for this for all three. What do you think are the best qualities of the other religions which would persuade you to join the religion?
Good. Okay. Eimad, we'll let you, and we're going to have to be really brief because we'll miss our.
The rabbi mentioned how oneness is the word that he would use in order to describe who God is. That is a quintessential to Islamic beliefs. Muslims believe that God is one being that is represented in anything and everything in creation. So I think that would be a quality which bring the two traditions together. Another quality that would bring the two traditions together, sort of borrowing from my other colleague, is compassion. There are numerous places in the Quran in which God talks about His mercy and talks about His genuine concern for the well-being of creation, including the human race. So those are very important qualities that we can easily subscribe to from the other two traditions.
I think there's a lot of things that are strong in both of these traditions. Emphasis on justice by both is important. What seems to me to be true of Islam that has been done very well is racial harmony. There's a great stress in Islam on the equality of all people being at the same level. And frankly, in Christianity, that has not been achieved very well. It is articulated theoretically, but not lived out very well practically. And on the Jewish side, there are many things, but one of the things that attracts me about many expressions of Judaism is this idea that we are working for the healing of the earth. That there is a pain and a suffering for life that we are to be about working to resolve.
Good.
Well, I think we're going to touch more on this in a future session. But to me, I think we're all really teaching the same thing. I think what we're all teaching is that God wants us to lead moral and ethical lives, and that, if we all do that, then we will have created, God's kingdom here on earth. It's not that, Judaism, says thou shalt not kill, and Christianity says kill, or, Judaism says, steal, and Islam says thou shalt not, steal. We're all really teaching the same values, and that's because we're all really coming out of the same religious beliefs and traditions. If you follow the histories of our faiths back, so I think that there's a lot that we do have in common. I mean, if you look on the surface, cosmetically, you're going to say, "Oh, that's different. He's got a different calendar than I do. He's got a different calendar than I do. I've got a different calendar than both of them. He's in a mosque, he's in a church, I'm in a synagogue." And when you get down to it and what we're teaching and the way we're trying to direct people, it's toward the knowledge of God and the moral and ethical lives that God expects us to lead as holy people.
I want to thank each of our guests, and I hope that you'll join me in expressing your appreciation.